So if you're ready to get started, I'm ready to get started. And believe it or not, I'm an introvert. So I get nervous doing these kinds of things. I know they never believe me, but I get nervous before every single lecture. And so I'm a little nervous tonight, but I know we're amongst friends. So glad for those of you who are joining us tonight. So I want to kick it off with the first question. And the first question, Kate, I want to pivot it to you. It's simply this, and if Kate, you'll answer first, Chris, you'll jump in, and Jules, if you'll close us out with this particular question. It's simply this: when did you first learn of the leadership of Supreme Court Justice Ginsberg, and how or why did it impact you?
So I actually reached out to a bunch of my friends because anybody who knows me knows that I'm obsessed with this woman. I have all of her autobiography. I've got, all of her biographies. I'm just a huge fan. I've got the RBG shirt. I've got the action figures, just a huge fan. And I think for me, I would like to say that it was an undergrad, but I think if I'm being really honest, it was when I started doing con law. Because you start reading a lot of the dissenting opinions. She has read more dissents in 1 year than any other justice in the last 50 years, which is like a public shaming of the majority opinion, which is very rare. So we started to read them, and I think mainly in 2013 when she started to become a pop culture icon, because there was this one specific case that essentially just kind of ruined the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and she wrote this blistering dissent, quoted the most eloquent, just I wish I could speak the way that she does, quoted Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, and John Lewis and several other civil rights advocates spoke, and it got media attention, and a bunch of students started referring to her as the Notorious RBG. So that's kind of where that came from. And I think that's where it originally caught my interest, is this tiny old lady who has become such a global phenomenon, and especially in American pop culture as well. So I guess long answer short was right in law school, I was in con law right as these cases started to come out in 2013.
Wow, so. Phenomenal. Chris, what about you?
Yeah, my first glimpse, because my professional career was definitely shaped in part by people like RBG, like Thurgood Marshall, who inspired a lot of her structural change. But my first glimpse of RBG was in middle school. I was in, Southside Columbus, Georgia, for middle school, just trying to make it through a day. And we had history class. And I believe the week before, we were talking about women's suffrage. And we talked about all the obstacles that they faced in getting their constitutional rights. Keep turning the pages and you see RBG, who, after hearing about all these barriers put in place to women and the movements that were created to combat that, you have someone that made it to the highest stage in the judicial circuit of the United States of America. And so to see that as somebody in middle school of color, seeing some of those institutions fractured by this one person was just incredible. And this is, coincided with the fact that, history doesn't paint Black activists that well. And so in this history book, of course, RBG was deified. And so she was definitely someone that inspired what I like to call a framework of possibility that change can happen just by seeing her break that, not even just a glass ceiling, but that steel ceiling above her. Professionally speaking, now, most of what she has done is shaping social work's tactics for political action. Social work has long had issues with engaging in structural change, and so there's not a lot of modalities out there that exist to help us do so. RBG is one of the few people out there that did it. She lived and breathed structural change. And so in my studies of social movements, I look to her as a blueprint. And, hearing that she died, particularly in the same year that John Lewis died, it gives you this feeling of despair, honestly. It's just this specter of death has been all over 2020. We've lost a lot of people. And it was doubly somber when I learned that, RBG had died. But she had a big impact on my life, for sure.
Wow, thank you, Chris. Wow, absolutely. Jules, jump in, share your thoughts.
Sure. And like Chris said, I remember learning her name really, I think the first time that I recall was in AP Government in high school. But then in college, this is going to date me a little bit, but the Lilly Ledbetter versus Goodyear case in 2007, I think it was, I was in college. That came out, and RBG wrote a scathing, one of her many scathing dissents about, gender discrimination, equal pay, and it fueled the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act of 2009 that Congress passed. Because, if you don't know anything about the case, there was this woman, she was a supervisor in a
Try one more time.
There we go. Is that better? Okay. But she was a supervisor in a tire plant in Alabama. She had been a supervisor her entire career since the 70s. She, was one of the few females in her industry, certainly at her company. And she found out a few months or a year before she was retiring in the 90s that she got an anonymous letter saying that she was being paid several $1,000s less than men of like the lowest seniority. She's worked here her entire career, and she finds out that she's being paid over $1,000 less per month than the lowest guy on the rung. So, or on the lowest rung. So it's, you get into we're still fighting for equal pay, but that case specifically and the Lilly Ledbetter Act, it's hard to explain if quickly and efficiently, but it's if you get a paycheck, you're supposed to have or before this you had 180 days to claim discrimination. Well, she didn't find out until the end of her career, so she's trying to get back pay or something for all of these decades that she was working here. But now the new rule under the 2009 Act is that each paycheck restarts a new 180 days. So that was the first big push really for equal pay that we've seen. And so that kind of really kicked it into gear. Then when I got into law school, obviously, like Kate said, learning, reading a lot of her dissents, even a lot of her opinions in constitutional law and other classes. And I even taught one of her big cases in my class at Oglethorpe last year. It was the U.S. versus Virginia. So she's had a lasting impact, not just women's rights issues, but just for everyone. And she's just been a champion for everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you guys, all three of you, for just that heartfelt response. And you've kind of tapped into it a little bit, but if you don't mind, I want us to go a little bit deeper. And Chris, if you'll kick us off, and this leads us to my second question for you guys, which is, how has her work inspired you or impacted you in the ways in which you advocate for transformative change?
Right. So I guess in one part, it kind of goes back to that framework of possibility for me. And this idea that you can be born in a system built atop and against you and still rise up to just the levels that she went to change the circumstances. And so the spirit of that definitely carries me on, because for people who work in political action and in community development, the idea that you are trying to reshape fundamentally something that you are sitting atop is it's in itself dissonant, but it's just something that is really not for the faint of heart. And luckily we had somebody like RBG to do it. But even more specific to the kind of work that I do, I do work that's called power critique and systemic critiques, which basically looks at certain social institutions in, for example, the United States, and attempts to poke holes at it so that the bad after effects of it don't affect the people in practice. And her work, particularly with gender inequality, pokes so many holes in power, so many issues and glaring issues in power that were systematically disadvantaging so many different segments of people. And my work, I hope it will be something that lives up to that legacy. Probably not possible, but it doesn't hurt to try.
And what do they say? Shoot for the moon. At best, you'll reach the stars or something like that. I'm probably messing that up a little bit, but I think that every day your commitment to it honors that legacy, Chris. So I'm excited of what's ahead of you. Jules, again, how has her life work, her legacy inspired you, and how you strive for transformative change in the work that you do?
I think just, you know, like I said, being a champion for everyone, not just women. You know, obviously women's rights is very important to me as a woman, as a lawyer, following, you know, in her footsteps, because she paved the way for me to be a lawyer. But just for everyone needs a voice, and you know, you may not agree with everybody, but you at least have to give them the chance. And this is something that I think we focused a lot on in the urban leadership program. It's been a big focus for me in my practice. It's just letting everybody have the opportunity to say what they need to say. And again, you don't have to agree with them. They don't have to agree with you. You don't have to fight each other. You just need everybody get out what they want to say, do it diplomatically. Positive discourse is something that I tell people all the time, that you just stop, listen, and very respectfully tell them, you know, this is my opinion. I respect where you're coming from. This is my opinion. What can we do to make this work for everyone? I think that, you know, that's not really something that a lot of people focus on. I think reading biographies about her, you know, it's clear if you really get into it that she was very, very big into that. But you think of Notorious RBG and you think that she's just this tiny little force to be reckoned with and speaking her mind. But behind the curtains, she's the one that's like, okay, kids, settle down. We need to work this out. So I think that's something that I strive for in everything that I do, and it's always been important to me, even before I really knew of her legacy. But that's, you know, something that just means a lot to me, and I respect that she has taken that tack her entire career.
Absolutely.
And she had to really, but.
Absolutely. You took me back to ULP classes where you'd always be the consensus builder. You'd be like, okay, this is great, but what are we going to do? And you'd always get to rallying around your leadership that way. So thank you for that fond memory. Kate, jump in your work. Again, how has her life impacted what you do on the daily?
So I think my job, sometimes I feel like I'm part of the government, I'm part of this system. So sometimes I feel like maybe I'm not exactly following with what she would have liked, because we know she was more liberal in how she viewed, especially instances involving the criminal justice system, right? So I prosecute people for a living. And that sometimes is something that I struggle with. But the main thing that I took away from her and what inspired me to keep going is just to be brave. She's this small woman. She, you know, just this tiny woman who would go in front of the Supreme Court. She argued case after case in the 70s. She won 5 out of 6 of her women's rights cases. And she has this quote, you know, I think it was better to be a bitch than a mouse. And that's something that really resonates with me, because nobody here knows this except for Dr. Momon and my dad, who I think is watching. Hi, Dad. I feel like a big kid now. I struggled with public speaking. I struggled immensely with having just breakdowns before I'd have to give a presentation. If you had told me back in 2009 I'd be doing this, I would have laughed in your face. But the fact that she was brave enough to read dissents at a time when other people weren't, the fact that she was brave enough to speak up, even though the system is telling you you should be doing this, and people were actively and vehemently disagreeing with her and being disrespectful, the way that Julie said. I mean, there was an instance of Justice Alito just being so rude to her in 2013. And the fact that she could be polite to everyone but still speak with such ferocity, I think that's something that I've tried to model in my practice. I try to get along with opposing counsel, but I try not to let people walk over me. I think that's something that especially women struggle with. We have to walk this line between being perceived as being a bitch, which I think is terrible. If you're strong, you're viewed a certain way. But if you're meek, you're mousy, people tend to walk all over you and they don't let you finish. And I found that to be true even today when I go into court and I argue motions. I'll have male opposing counsel interrupt me, which is just completely unprofessional. And just walking this line of figuring out how do I as an attorney be tough while at the same time being respectful. And I think especially after last night, I think that's something that's so important to everybody that we keep in mind. And these are hot button issues. Race, abortion, things like that are always going to be hot button issues. But to me, at the end of the day, I'm not going to back down from my opinion. But especially as I've gotten older, I've learned how to be more respectful in how I deliver my message.
Well, Kate, that's so rich. I mean, if there's a question that I'm asked, it's literally what you stated, which is how to be strong and soft at the same time. And it's a tension to be managed that can feel like a burden. But I'm proud just to hear you articulate how you do that on the daily. And then just your vulnerability in sharing to many of the OU students who are on with us tonight, something that you and I knew and your dad knew, which was Kate struggled with public speaking. And again, I remember we would just have those one-on-ones. Literally, sometimes I would hear her speech in advance because we'd walk through it in my office so she would feel comfortable knowing that she was in a safe space when she was presenting. And so for those of you who are on the line tonight, all of my students, alum, those from who I haven't taught that are on the line tonight, know that where you begin isn't where you'll end. And if Kate can be a role model in that way, please, I'm sure she'd love to talk with you. And I'm excited about you teaching this class with us in the spring, because maybe there will be a segment in there talking about how you navigate. That was a conversation Julie, I call her Jules, you guys, pardon me, but that's a conversation that Julie and I had as well about that navigation of how to be strong, but also how to, still maintain your femininity, if you will, in what are still male-dominated fields. So thank you guys for sharing that. I want to shift the conversation just a little bit. And this is something that I thought about for myself personally, but I wanted to ask you guys, and it was simply this. If you had had the opportunity to be an audience of one with the notorious RBG, what would you have asked her? Or what would you have wanted to say to her to thank her for her legacy? Kate, I'm gonna have you kick that off. Chris, if you'll jump in after, and Jules, if you'll close us out with that thought.
I'll keep it very brief because I feel like I just touched on it. My number one question would be, were there times that you doubted yourself? And what did you say to yourself, and what did you draw on to keep going? This is a woman that she was in law school and she was asked by a professor why she was taking a man's place. She was asked to essentially leave her job to have children. She basically just had this incredible life, but it's had so much negativity. Her mother died. She had a sister die. She's had cancer multiple times. She lost friends at a young age. Growing up as a Jewish woman in a really scary time, to me really resonated, because I've struggled, and I know men and women struggle with this, but I have found as I've gotten older, imposter syndrome is real. I suffered from it. I would like to know what she told herself in those moments when she came back and didn't win a case, because I've been there. The worst day of my life, I had a child molestation case that I lost, and I had to go back and tell the victim essentially that the jury didn't believe her. And it's moments like that where I wanted to quit, and I haven't yet. I've had great moments. I got to go tell a girl that her father was being sentenced to 30 years for molesting her systematically. since she was younger, but it's those moments where you feel like you're not good enough. And I would love to have kind of like I guess a life coach moment with her rather than more about the trajectory of her career.
Wow, powerful. Thank you for sharing. Chris, what about you?
Actually, really similar to what Kate was saying, but worded a little different. I guess, what kept you going in times of despair? I, over the past week, was reading some of the stories, not just about her career, but who she was as a person. And at Harvard Law, her husband got testicular cancer while they were both in school. And during that time, she was expected to take care of him as well as their kids. And so that's what she did. She took care of him, and he could only eat at night because he had cancer. And so she would basically feed him, have him pretty much ready for the next day, and then get to her homework and stuff at 2:00 in the morning every night. And so I would want to ask, where does that power come from? How do you muster that in times where it just seems like you have nothing else left to give? And you know, it surprised me, the list of questions that I had that I would have asked, but this was the most important one, just because, I mean, politics aside and social movement theory aside, this is the stuff that really keeps you going and pushes you through. We talk so much about resiliency and social work and how it offsets reality and the parameters that are brought upon the most vulnerable. And it just would have been incredible to know what that testimony was.
Wow. Yeah, I think of the word grit, and the incredible grit that she had across the board. And Jules, I want you to jump in, but just in case anyone was wondering, I would want to ask her about that work-life balance, similar to what you were asking about, Chris, not in terms of the functionality of work-life balance, but how do you keep and maintain your personhood with such a huge, if you will, persona that's present before you. Because I think in terms of that imposter syndrome, for some of us, we've lost our identity because we've been forced to pull on or to put on the mask of the public identity or the career identity. So thank you guys for sharing that. Jules, what about you?
I'm going to kind of take a little bit different route from the other two and say, I would want to ask her if she would have done anything differently. Specifically, in her later years, she really embodied the Notorious RBG. She really lived into it. And, you know, she would go on talk shows and, you know, was happy to do interviews and, you know, just really took on the persona that everybody gave her. But if you go back, you know, she was a zealous advocate in the 70s for gender discrimination. But then once she got onto the DC circuit and going into her Senate confirmation hearings for the Supreme Court, she was actually very moderate. And she sided a lot with the conservatives, which I think people would be very shocked to find out. But, you know, it comes back to this, you know, how are we going to do the most good for everyone? And, you know, how are we going to get everybody's opinions out there? How are we going to, she used the term immoderate. I am moderate. So, you know, you have most opinions are just very blunt and blatant and, you know, accusatory and just, you know, they can be very, very terrible things. And she would come in with her dissent or, you know, she voiced an opinion on something and just very measured. And, you know, I think that really hurt her when she was going into her Senate confirmation hearings. She actually did not have the support of a lot of women's groups back then. So, you know, and it's because she didn't take the stance that she had early in her career and then towards the end of her career. And I would really want to know if she would, you know, if she would have wanted to take on that persona earlier on, or if she would have changed, you know, how measured she was during the 80s and early 90s. If she would have, you know, maybe tried to look a little further down the line and see where that was going to take her. If she was, you know, if she knew that this was, you know, she was going to be the face of the liberals in the 2010s. So it's just, why go from one end of the spectrum to the other and then back?
Wow. Totally get it. I'm gonna put this quote out there, and then you guys respond. I don't have a selected order for you guys, but I just want you to respond. Get your thoughts on this quote from RBG. We know it. We've heard it often, but it's this, and I quote: "Women belong in all places where decisions are being made." What are your thoughts on that? What are your takes on that?
Okay, I guess I'll go first because I'm the only one that's not muted. I absolutely agree, but I also agree that everyone should get a decision. If they're in the room, you should be in the room and you should get a decision if it affects you. But certainly she has done so much for women to be able to be at that table, be in that room. So just how can we keep living on with that? Like right now, I feel like more and more people are being shut out of that room and being shut out of the decision-making process. So what can we do to pivot that? Because it absolutely is true. If something affects you, you should have a say, right? It's just, if you're living at home when you're a kid and your parents ground you, you think you have this big attitude, like, no, I don't deserve that, or whatever it is, but it's a decision that affects you, but you're a kid, you may not know. But now, if you have a right to vote, you should be able to do that. But certainly, if we look back on her history, where she was in the 1950s, absolutely she should get a say. Women should get a say. Everyone should get a say. And we've come so far, but there's still so much work to be done.
Wow, thanks. Kate, Chris, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, just seeing how the Constitution lived out itself through her in full is something that's always been incredible to me. Just in my research, we read a lot about neoliberalism and the system that we live in. And for the greater part of American history, neoliberalism has basically ran the strings as far as our social welfare network works, as far as our bureaucracy works in this country, et cetera, et cetera. And the way that she was to be able to be the counterbalance by just manifesting what the Constitution was, fighting for the promise that was supposed to be endowed to everybody in the first place, is incredible. And to be honest, it took a woman. It took a woman to get to where, to bring us to where we needed to be. To have someone that was from the least of these make it to the top and speak to the Constitution's promise for everybody. That's just, it's almost poetic to me.
And more importantly, I don't know how many people know this, but it started with her defending a man. That's how she got everybody's attention.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Jules. Kate, what are your thoughts?
I have that quote on a poster in my office. I look at it every day. I am a huge feminist. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsberg was always very quick to say, I'm not pro-woman over pro-man, I'm pro-everybody. And that's something that I think gets left out of that portion of that quote. She was always quick to say, just like Julie said, she's had several cases involving men. She got her start. Widowers didn't receive the same benefits and rights as widows. That's a very condensed version. I know we don't have all day and this isn't a law class, but essentially one of the cases which she deemed one of her favorites was a man lost his wife and wanted to stay home and get Social Security benefits and take care of his newborn child. And she actually took that to the Supreme Court because she said it doesn't matter if it's on the basis of sex, it's wrong. We shouldn't be discriminating one way or the other. But I think something that I take from that quote, and I think it's still relevant today, sexism is still something that we're dealing with. We're still having issues being heard in all areas of politics and government. The way women are treated is not, unfortunately, the same way men are treated in the political arena. She had to stand up for Justice Sotomayor She was criticized when she became a justice. She made some comments about how she felt like her views as a Latina woman were going to help her. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg actually stood up for her and said that it was ridiculous that she was receiving criticism for that. She said that women deserve to be heard. Her viewpoint as a woman, her viewpoint as a Latina is similar to her viewpoint as a woman and as a Jewish woman. And I think that's so important when women do deserve to be in all places that decisions are being made, but it's not just that. It's everybody deserves to be, like what Julie said, everybody deserves to be given a voice and an opportunity and a chance to speak. Like Chris said, this promise of what we could have if everybody did have an equal say and an equal chance to argue their viewpoints. And I think that that's important. But I think just based on my viewpoint as a woman, to me, that just quote is just so important to me, because it's important that your voice is heard and you're a part of the conversation. And it doesn't matter what level you're at, just every day moving forward, making sure that you speak up for what you believe in.
Wow, thank you guys. I know we're getting closer to the end of our time. And so there is a question in the chat that I want to ask you guys. And I want to remind everyone that if you have a question for the panelists, by all means, you can type it in the chat room, or in a moment after I ask them this next question, I'll just ask you to unmute your line and ask your question. And so the question in the chat is from our librarian, Eli Arnold. And his question is simply this: have you all been able to use Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seemingly genuine relationship with Justice Scalia as an example of dealing with those with whom you disagree?
I love that question. I love the fact that the two of them had such a playful relationship. They went at it like crazy when they were arguing. He often wrote a majority or a dissent, and she would write a majority or dissent on the other side. And I don't know if everybody here knows this, but they were really close friends outside of court sessions. They would go on family vacations together. And to me, this idea of embracing everyone, even if we don't have viewpoints, is something, especially in 2020, especially after last night, I'm going to say that again, is something that's so important to me. I tend to have more liberal views, but I work obviously with law enforcement every day, and we're not always going to agree, but I try to keep things respectful with opposing counsel, with law enforcement, with my coworkers, because we're all going to have differing opinions. But yeah, absolutely. She said something once that I thought was so funny. She said that I love him, but sometimes I want to strangle him. And to me, it was kind of like, it sounds weird, but it kind of is like an old married couple that would just fight all the time, but they would keep it respectful. And I think that as attorneys, that's something that's extremely important to our profession. You always have to keep in mind that you can fight it out in the courtroom, you can fight it out in your briefs, but at the end of the day, this is your colleague, your coworker, and we need to be respectful. And I can't stress this enough. I think just this idea of embracing everyone, there are hot button issues, and I think that today, I think that's a really important message.
Absolutely. Chris, Jules, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it reminds me of a sermon by Dr. King. Love your enemy. We are really not going to get anywhere hating each other for what we believe. As we saw again last night is just such a perfect example of why at least political decorum is healthy. We need to be able to love thy enemy, but hate our habits, hate our behaviors, hate the things that are causing the isms that we're fighting against. And I mean, for her, just in theory and in practice, to be a really good friend of someone that she constantly disagreed with, it just shows that it's possible. It shows it's possible for anybody. If she did it for her entire career, why can't we do it when we engage each other in dialogue and conversation? You know, loving thy enemy means not appeasing them based on what they're doing and the behaviors that are causing you harm. Loving thy enemy is having the patience to have a conversation with someone and to bring them into our shared reality so that we have some kind of understanding that where we're at is not good, but only together can we make it forward. And so, yeah, I mean, she, just like with Dr. King, lived that to the fullest, and she, I mean, incredibly successful with working with the people that she worked with.
Jules.
Yeah, this is an example that I use all the time. If you ask anyone that took my class last semester or last year, they probably remember me talking about this too. But it's what I was saying earlier. It's everybody deserves to have their opinion, and then you can respectfully disagree. You can hash it out, so to say, but do it politely. And I think their friendship was a beautiful example of that. They had completely differing views of the Constitution, and this is, they're interpreting our laws, and they can disagree on everything, but at the end of the day, they're best friends, and they don't get into, shouting matches and talking over each other. That's exactly how it's supposed to be. And if you can't do that, then what's the point of even, that's why people are afraid to speak up, because they're afraid that somebody else is not going to listen to them. They're just going to cut them off. So if you can have these conversations and still be friends, nobody takes it personally, and you're still friends at the end of the day, and you can go to the opera together, and you can go on family vacations, and that's what it's supposed to be like. And I think we really need to focus on that, and I think that would bring a great relief to everyone in what's going on right now and in the US. So it's a beautiful example. I use it all the time.
Wow, thank you guys for sharing. Last night when I was watching the debate, it goes back, and some of my Intro to Politics students are on right now. So it goes back to what I say the first day of class in all my classes, because I tend to teach classes that will have an element of controversy in them, or disagreement or challenge. And you guys know this, you probably can quote it, but we can attack the issues all day long. We are just not allowed in these classes to attack each other. Again, that there are some ground rules of civility that we will honor, that we will uphold, that we will remind ourselves as a community are our standards. Because again, when you go back to King, as you said, Chris, Dr. King, one of my favorite things about him is the 6 steps and principles of nonviolence. The end goal of nonviolence is reconciliation, no matter how difficult the adversary that you are facing. And in order to reconcile, that means I have to give up something of myself that I believe and deem is valuable, while you also lean in and give up something of yourself that you believe is valuable, because we're trying to find common ground. And so I think you guys are so absolutely correct in terms of just sharing how you try to honor, as you said, Kate, those who sometimes you're in conflict with because of your views, but you recognize the dignity of their human worth. You recognize the value of the work that they do, as you shared as well, Julie, as you shared too, Chris. What I want to do is this: if there's anyone that's joining us tonight that wants to ask the panel a question, I want to give us an opportunity to do that before I ask them a closing question, and then I let you know what's coming up next month. So just a heads up, we're going to do this every month, and I'm excited for tonight. But I'm also excited about what's going to happen next month, and our guests that we're going to have joining us, one of whom is on the line tonight. So does anyone that's joining us have a question? Do you want to unmute your line and ask the panelists?
We were that good.
Amen, amen. Hey, I'll use a term that we use in some of our meetings: sensing a lull. We'll pioneer and we'll move forward. And so this is what I want to ask you guys, and it's a little bit of a personal ask, but because you all have participated. Oh, Sarah, go ahead. I'm sorry, we have a question.
Sorry, guys. I have a question for the panelists, and it's not necessarily about. It's about the Supreme Court, more or less, though. In this increasingly polarized society, and the fact that it's so the divide is so much more bigger. I think we're gonna see more and more trends of justices and potential justices having to straddle that moderate line when they get nominated. So I'm wondering, where do you think I don't know. I'm just understanding that, for instance, like that relationship between Justice Scalia and Justice Ginsberg, like they're totally opposite spectrums, but they had that professional and personal, there were firebrands on each side of the spectrum. And of course that didn't always start that way from the jump for Justice Ginsberg. But if we're having maybe even people who are professionally super credentialed, but don't really stand for anything, but they have they fit the mold of what moderates and each side are like, oh, hey, this is a good middle ground person and therefore they should fill the seat. And honestly, I know that I'm really concerned about how you're going to have a diversity of opinions and a lot of representation of different demographics and perspectives on the court if we're increasingly, because of this divide, we as a nation are only courageous enough to confirm people who are straddling the middle. So I just wanted to kind of hear your thoughts on that. And is it really just because of the way the lifelong tenure is for justices that maybe people become more one way or another? I'm not a law student, I'm not an attorney, so I just kind of wanted to bring it up to you all. So thank you.
I'll take a stab at that one. I don't think there's any real answer for what is the best viewpoint for a Supreme Court justice or any judge really. And actually, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was very vocal early on about how the court is supposed to be very moderate. They are supposed to reflect the viewpoints of the majority. And right now, what is the majority? We don't know. As you said, there's more of a divide than ever, and it just seems like that just keeps growing and growing instead of going the opposite way. I think you need to have somebody that has more of a leaning. I don't think the Senate would really want to confirm somebody that does not have any strong opinions, but I think it's important for us to have justices and federal judges, and even, in Georgia, we elect our state court judges. So it's, you want to know where their loyalties lie, so to say, but it's a hard measure, or it's a hard balance to figure out, how can we continue to work towards bridging this divide and not get lost in the middle, but how can we make everybody happy? And it's a very fine line, and it's, right now we're not doing very well at it, but I think the court is absolutely supposed to be, okay, for most justices are not in the limelight. Scalia and Ginsburg were both very different from most justices. They prefer, especially Ginsburg, she loved to be in the limelight, and Scalia liked to voice his opinion because his opinion was so different from everybody else. But most of them live in the background. We don't know anything about their personal lives, and that's actually pretty important because it means that we don't really know how they're going to rule on something, but they need to take a stance one way or the other. Earlier this summer, we had the Chief Justice coming in with some pretty key tie votes and a more leftist on more leftist issues, and that was completely unexpected for a lot of people. But we need to have you need to be able to see another perspective and think, yeah, maybe in the long run that's going to be something that's going to be important. We need to fix that issue now, or just we can't have somebody that's going to change their mind on every single issue every single time, and you never know what's going to come up. So it's really just a fine line, hard to balance, hard to figure that out. And I don't know, right now I think we're going too far one way or the other with justices. I think we did that with the last two as well. So I think that's not what the court's supposed to be. That's not what Ginsburg wanted. That's not what she thought her confirmation process was supposed to be. So You know, I think we should stick with what worked before, which is I'm one to change the system and manipulate the system a little bit just to see if something different's going to work. But I think right now what's happening is not working, and I think we need to go back before we can move forward. At least with confirming justices in our current climate.
Wow, great insight, great insight. I know we're drawing to a close tonight, but Chris and Kate, did you want to add anything to that comment there, or anything else you want to add?
Yeah, just to that student, I know it wasn't the bulk of your question, but it does seem like you're a little apprehensive about what's to come. I would just say, from a theoretical level and a personal level, that right now this discomfort is just a part of the process. Like, this is where change happens. For better or for worse, this is where change happens. I mean, theoretically, we talk so much about how all the social movements that have existed in the world have only happened during great destabilization. Irish Troubles, the French Revolution, the Civil Rights Movement. There was a bunch of stuff globally that was happening. So we have the pandemic globally, but then domestically, we have this great political binary going on too, that it's just the social scientist in me is excited. The African American in me is very worried. Because usually change comes at the consequence of my well-being. But scratch that to say, because I'm trying to make you feel safe. This is a great time for change. And it's uncomfortable because it's supposed to be. We've been comfortable with business as usual, and it's going to get uncomfortable when the foundations of what's usual are being shaken up. But it's healthy. Like, it's kind of like working out. It really doesn't feel good in the beginning, but you work it out and it becomes just a part of who you are. And so just stay critically engaged with the information that's being given to you. Definitely engage in any kind of activism that you think, I don't want to assume what your affiliation is, but engage in the process as well, because that'll probably make you feel better. This is the social worker coming out of me now. And avoid Twitter and Facebook for your news, because that's a slippery slope, and that may do more harm than good.
I love it. I love it. Kate, you want to add anything there?
I would just say I would prefer to have a moderate on the Supreme Court all day, every day, rather than these polar opinions. I think they're important. I think that people naturally, we have biases. That doesn't make us bad people. I had a class with Dr. Momon about that, where we talked about inherent biases. I don't know if anyone else has had that discussion. I don't think that the current Supreme Court pick is moderate. I'm not trying to comment politically, but I think that this job has a life tenure for a specific reason. We don't want someone who's swayed politically, thinks they're going to lose their job or lose a vote. I think that is key, and that is important. Like Julie said, I think we don't want people who are in the limelight. It just so happened that the limelight kind of found RBG. But I think I would prefer a moderate, at least if I understood your question correctly. I would, even if we don't know where they're going to stand, because at the end of the day, they shouldn't be making decisions based on how they personally feel. They need to check as much as they can, they need to check their biases at the door and decide the legal issue right before them, not how do I want the case to come out because I feel sorry for this person in this specific instance, because even if the case that the court is deciding right now would be beneficial to rule in favor of one party or the other, it's going to have effects obviously on the entire United States. So I think it's scary to not know where someone stands on the issues, but I would prefer that it not be a political game the way it seems to have been the last several years. I wish that it was more about the law.
Wow.
And just one more little bit about making the case for the moderate judges. Moderates are going to be more likely to see other perspectives. So when you're thinking about somebody that's going to be making a decision that's going to have a lasting impact, do you want somebody that has their blinders on, or do you want somebody that's going to be able to look at an issue from all sides? And I think once you look at it that way, you would feel a lot more comfortable having somebody that could look at it from multiple perspectives.
Absolutely. Thank you guys. Brilliant responses, rich, robust responses. As we wrap up for tonight, I want to share an announcement with you and then just ask you guys to give us any final departing thoughts before we get off tonight. But if you will, mark your calendars for October 28th, 2020 at 7 p.m. We will be right back here with our next ULP conversation. And we'll be talking about voter suppression, the 2020 election, and you. Voter suppression, the 2020 election, and you. And we have two phenomenal guests that will be joining us in the conversation. First, we have OU alum Stacy Chavis, who's actually joining us on the line tonight. Thank you so much, Stacy, for being with us. She'll be sharing, and Stacy has a rich background in political organizing and campaigns and political leadership. And so there she is right there. So we look forward to hearing from you next month, Stacy. And joining Stacy will be Gwinnett County Commissioner Marlene Fosku. And Marlene is the first African-American woman to hold that position. Actually, I believe she's the first African-American to hold that county commission seat for Gwinnett. And so she'll be joining us as well. So again, October 28th, 7 p.m. Invite your friends if you can be with us, because it's sure to be a needed conversation, especially given what happened last night and what's sure to come with these other VP and presidential debates that are before us. And so as we close out tonight, first, let me just tell you all, thank you, thank you, thank you. Kate, you said something earlier about sometimes wanting to give up. The life of anyone who's in the public can be hard. Dr. King said it this way: the vocation to speak is a calling filled with agony. Still, we must speak with all the humility that the situation requires. And there have been moments in my career as a professor where, similar to you, Kate, I wanted to give up. But it's you guys. You guys are like the coins in my front pocket that I get to hold on to because I've been blessed to see you blossom, see you grow, see you find your voice and lead. And so I just want to tell you, I'm a proud professor tonight, proud to be your professor, but more honored to call you friend. And so as we close out tonight, any departing thoughts, anything that you'd share with those listening on the line tonight, even about the ULP, and why perhaps they should consider that. So just as you close out, and I don't, again, want to put a binary order on it, but whoever wants to go first, you got something on your heart, share some departing thoughts with us tonight. And let me ask you this: if you are comfortable with students reaching out to you, is it okay if I give them your email addresses? So if you'll just give me the thumbs up on that too, as you close up. All right, we got the thumbs up on that. So go ahead, take us home tonight.
That's a heavy statement. Take us home. All right. Well, the Urban Leadership Program was incredible for me. Freshman in undergrad, didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I knew there were issues out there. And Dr. Momon, we talked about this before. You just gave me a new perspective on how politics operates, institutional. And that these institutions, they're just conventions that we can change if we opt into being change agents. And so I appreciate that part of the process. And honestly, it was one of those programs that really poised me for what I'm doing now. Seeing the power in writing and research and interrogating these pillars of power and trying to reshape society in a way that benefits people. I mean, as much as we think these things are rigid and they think that they're just an intrinsic part of reality, these were decisions made. Everything that we see, everything, the fact that we got a stimulus check months ago that was supposed to carry us to today was a decision by people in politics that thought this was enough. Constantly interrogate that power. And I think that the Urban Leadership Program was that mechanism through which I worked that muscle to start interrogating power.
Yeah, thank you. Jules, Kate, Jules, who wants to take us home?
I think that I took almost all the courses that were available for the program. I learned invaluable lessons about the way that we interact with our government, the way that we interact in politics, and the way it affects us, even if we feel like we're privileged enough that we're not part of the system and these decisions don't affect us. And I think that for me was a huge wake-up call when I was in my, a 19, 20, 21 in undergrad. I would encourage everyone to keep taking those classes. I'm trying not to get too touchy-feely, but for me personally, especially having Dr. Momon as my mentor really helped, because I would come into her office and just feel so defeated and feel like I got a C in public speaking, I'll never do it. And then 3 years later, I'm arguing cases in front of juries. I did an international mock trial. I mean, it's just amazing the amount of stuff that you go through when you push yourself out of your comfort zone. I think we're all there in 2020. I think nobody's comfortable right now, no matter where you are, no matter what your political beliefs are, your religious beliefs. I would just encourage you to be, not to be corny, but to be like RBG, use your voice, speak up, dissent when you need to dissent, do it respectfully. That's my biggest thing that I've had to learn how to do as a female attorney, is to just respectfully disagree and not give up my power and stay strong when I know that I'm right about something. And I would love it if anybody wants my email address, if anybody is looking for advice, I would absolutely love to give it. If I don't have the answer, I'll hook you up with somebody that does. I'm friends with a lot of attorneys, a lot of OU grads who are attorneys. And I know Julie's more than capable of helping anyone, but if anybody personally wants to talk to me, I would absolutely love to talk to you. I'll be your biggest cheerleader.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. For real. Jules, take us home tonight.
Well, I want to echo everything Kate said. Please reach out to me if you want to. I think I learned so much in the leadership program, leadership classes, and the politics classes, and I've used it almost every day. I graduated over 10 years ago now, and every single day it shows up in some way or another. And so it's just, it's practice what you preach, have an opinion, voice your opinion, but remember decorum. Going back to last night, decorum is important. Think about how much we can get done if we're more open to opposing opinions. Just be open to different perspectives and really take that to heart. And I think that's at the heart of what I got out of the leadership program. And again, I use it every single day. There are days when I go home and finally let out all of my frustration. I might cry because I've had to stand up and be a big girl, and especially going up in court against a man who's twice my age, who calls me girl, or whatever the case may be. But just stand your ground, but do it with respect for everyone else.
Wow. Well, listen, you guys, I don't know about you, but this was more than I expected tonight. It was powerful. I appreciate all three of you guys. Thank you again, Kate and Julie, for giving us some of your vacation time to just share and impart to those of us listening and those who will watch the replay. Chris, thank you for taking a moment away from graduate studies to join us tonight. This has been very rich and robust. And again, as I said, next month, join us October 28th for our next conversation of the Urban Leadership Program. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Have a good rest of your evening. See you soon.